Simón Bolívar, known colloquially as El Libertador, was a visionary leader who played a pivotal role in liberating South America from Spanish colonial rule. His military campaigns led to the independence of present-day Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. Bolívar's dream was to unite these liberated nations into a single, powerful federation, believing that a unified South America could stand strong against foreign domination. However, his vision was thwarted by deep-seated regional differences, political infighting, and the ambitions of local leaders. As internal conflicts and power struggles fractured the newly independent territories, Bolívar grew increasingly disillusioned, lamenting the fragmentation and instability that plagued the continent he had fought so hard to free. Starting as New Granada, the rump state of the newly dissolved Gran Colombia, we will attempt to reverse the fragmentation of South America and bring about the federation that Bolívar dreamed of, and perhaps engage in some mild seizing of the means of production. New Granada, while one of the stronger South American states, is still far from forming anything close to united South America in the year 1836. Quick and decisive action was necessary. First, we focused on restoring Gran Colombia by subduing Venezuela and Ecuador. Militarily, this endeavor was relatively straightforward, as neither state could withstand our forces. Economically and politically, however, it was a complicated affair, requiring both the suppression of resistance and the granting of concessions. We invested in job creation, primarily through the expansion of universities in Caracas. Next, we turned our attention south, aiming to end the union of Peru and Bolivia before it could challenge our claims to supremacy. By inviting Chile and Brazil to join our cause, we ensured that Peru-Bolivia stood no chance. After a free-front invasion, the union was dissolved and Peru was forced to join our burgeoning federation as a puppet. Politically, the pieces were now more or less in place to forge our federation. All that remained was the creation and spread of a shared national identity, represented in game by the research of pan-nationalism. However, this was still decades away. In the meantime, we would have to decide the character of the federation. Would we maintain the status quo, allowing the elite landowners to continue exploiting the hacienda system, which relied on the slavery and subjugation of hundreds of thousands of people? Would we let the growing military elite, the caudillos, seize power after their recent victories? Or would we pursue a third option, the liberalization of society, bringing about the end of both slavery and autocracy in one fell swoop? If we are to follow in the footsteps of Bolívar, an Enlightenment thinker, abolitionist, liberal, and Republican, the third option is the only valid path. Liberalizing our state would be a hard and long challenge, however. The landowners and the military would present significant roadblocks. Fortunately, we had two factors in our favor. First was the coalescing of a large anti-slavery coalition. Clerics, business magnates, farmers, and intellectuals had united to oppose the institution, forming a political party that was almost equal in strength to the conservative pro-slavery factions. Second was the arrival of the Italian liberal agitator Giuseppe Mazzini. Historically, he was one of the founders of the modern Italian state. For us, he could help bolster the anti-slavery faction. In 1841, the anti-slavery Liberal Party managed to win just enough seats in the election to secure a majority. Despite their tenuous hold on power, it was enough to begin the process of abolishing slavery. Of course, the landowners were not content to let their source of power and wealth slip away so easily. When their political efforts to stop the reform failed, they turned to violence. Pursuing the reform threatened to tear our country apart. However, seeing it as an essential stepping stone to building a free, democratic Andean federation, we pushed forward with the reform. Civil war soon became a reality. With crucial assistance from Brazil, the war was over in less than a year. The rebellion had failed, and slavery soon became a fading memory. The failed uprising had so thoroughly marginalized the landowning class that further reforms at their expense were pursued. Primarily, the practice of tenant farming was appended, allowing peasants and farmers to own their land. As a new, free Gran Colombia was proclaimed, the anti-slavery coalition had served its purpose and dissolved. Further reforms were pursued by a new, industrialist-led, free market liberal government. Free trade became policy, and, through the advocacy of the intellectuals like Mazzini, suffrage was extended to all adult literate men, including former slaves. With further investments in academia, a growing liberal intellectual class emerged, although the threats of radicals seizing the leadership of the Liberal Party led industrialists to split off and form their own free trade party. However, they stood no chance against the incoming radical wave. The popular Giuseppe Mazzini, now at the helm of the Liberal Party, won the elections in 1857 with a landslide. Universal male suffrage, religious rights, and public schooling were all implemented during his first 4 years as president. In just a mere 15 years, our nation had gone from practicing slavery and racial discrimination to becoming possibly the most progressive, free, and tolerant nation in the world. It was no surprise then that Gran Colombia soon began attracting migrants in droves, further strengthening our economy. Having emerged as the leading power in South America, Gran Colombia took the initiative to lead an effort to bring about a unified Andean federation. Peru, nearly fully integrated into Gran Colombia by this point, was not in much of a position to oppose the idea, while Chile, a firm ally of Gran Colombia, supported the initiative. This left Bolivia as the sole state opposing unification. Not surprising, given that we had spearheaded a war against them just a few decades earlier. As such, we had to once again turn to our military. Of course, waging a war of conquest to bring about the federation is perhaps a departure from the liberal and democratic values which we had just embraced. But Bolivia was a dictatorial slave state, so who's to decide what counts as unlawful annexation or rightful liberation? Either way, Bolivia was swiftly conquered and reduced to a mere rump state. Basking in the glory of the latest military victory, the Federation of the Andes was declared, merging Gran Colombia, Peru, and Chile and the conquered Bolivian territories into a single unified state. While this sudden expansion made us stronger, it also presented new challenges. Stretching from the Caribbean to the Antarctic Sea, our new state encompassed some of the harshest terrains in the world. Our territories were, in many ways, disjointed from one another. The solution was massive investments in infrastructure, first with ports and later with railways. Such investments, however, were unfeasible under the current budget, necessitating tax hikes. Unsurprisingly, these policies, while necessary, were deeply unpopular. President Giuseppe Mazzini, having served 3 full terms, lost the elections in 1869 to a rather unremarkable candidate from the newly formed Agrarian Party. Although Mazzini's policies produced remarkable economic growth, helping the Liberal Party secure victory in the 88th free elections, the state investments proved unsustainable long term. Fearing a default, a period of economic austerity began. Taxes were increased further, and all state investments in industrial construction were temporarily paused. A solution to the economic crisis presented itself with the construction of a canal across the Panama Isthmus. Deemed possible after completing a year-long survey, construction began in May 1886. As the national debt was largely paid off, taxes could finally be lowered. A thriving economy, a growing middle class, and a sudden influx of state revenue from the canal and from some foreign military interventions turned our deficit into a surplus for the first time in 40 years. Now, under the helm of a new conservative government, the Andean Federation embarked on a period of massive economic growth, with state investments doubling the size of our construction sector. Of course, this period of economic growth had implications not only for us, but also for our neighbors, as we now possess the power to project our influence abroad. A brief incursion into Argentina to end slavery made them our puppet. The massive economic growth in the 1890s brought levels of prosperity, wealth, and grandeur previously unseen in our nation. However, it also exacerbated growing class disparities, leading to discontent among the working class that now encompass the majority of our population. Hearing news of workers in Great Britain rising up to seize the means of production, socialist ideas gained mainstream support. Workers, farmers, and even small business owners soon organized their support under the new upstart Social Democratic Party, uniting around the idea of promoting social and economic reforms. Securing a landslide victory, the Social Democrats outmaneuvered both the Liberal and Conservative parties, securing a firm majority in the 1897 election. Delivering on their promises of reforms, workers' rights were made mandatory and health services were socialized. This led to an enormous increase in living standards, turning the Andean Federation into the nation with the highest living standards in the world. Promising further social and political reforms, the Social Democrats granted women full suffrage in 1905. To promote trade and secure Andean interests in dealing with other great powers, Articles of Union were signed in late December 1901, leading to the creation of an economic union between the Andean Federation and Argentina. In 1908, the union expanded to include Brazil, followed by Paraguay, the Central American states, and finally Mexico. Mounting pressures and a growing schism over whether further reforms, including the total redistribution of wealth, should be pursued, led to the fracturing of the Social Democratic Party. In its place, trade unionists began to rally behind the newly formed Communist Party. As oil was discovered and began to be exploited to fuel the growing automobile industry, a new challenge emerged. Our population, though resourceful and efficient, was not large enough to fill the increasing number of job vacancies. To stimulate further immigration, multiculturalism was passed into law, and as people all over the world began to migrate to our federation, our population skyrocketed, growing from 38 million in 1918 to 57 million in 1927, and finally reaching a staggering 82 million in 1936. With increasing concessions to the fledgling Communist Party, by 1933 they were in a position to demand the institution of a council republic, transferring power from the state to workers' councils. Politically unable to stop the communists and lacking the ability to mount the military opposition as the landowners had before them, all opposition forces were compelled to accept the change as inevitable. In 1935, the laissez-faire system that had guided the Federation to economic prosperity was abolished in favor of a cooperative model, resulting in the seizure of all privately owned industries. The outcome was a remarkably high standard of living and the end of class society. With reforms being tremendously popular, nearly 90% of our population became loyalists, with only a few thousand remaining discontent. By the end of the game, we had not only united South America into a federation and an economic union, we had also peacefully and successfully established a democratic form of communism. The question remains, however, whether our new form of government could sustain anything close to the incredible levels of economic growth we experienced under the laissez-faire system. Private investments was a crucial factor in our rapid economic expansion. If we were to continue the game, it's likely that our growth would slow down considerably. However, from another perspective, one could argue that a slowdown in growth might not be particularly concerning. After all, our living standards are now so high that even the poorest Colombian in 1936 enjoys a standard of living comparable to, or even better than, that of the richest Colombian aristocrat just a century earlier. In the long run, it's possible that this might be detrimental, as rival powers could potentially outpace us economically. By leveraging their economic might, they could seize some of the resources that have contributed to our wealth. For now, though, we are by far the wealthiest and most prosperous nation in the world. But perhaps you'd be interested in seeing how, instead of turning South America communist, we could make it a colony of a theocratic Spain. If so, please check out the following video.